100 too few for England and 100 too many for Australia meant there was nothing they could do to stop Australia taking the Ashes series 4-1. Let's talk about Sydney, let's look at both teams, and let's see if there's anything that could have been done to change the result. We're going to do a full review of the Ashes series, which will probably be next week now. But I just thought I'd come in and sit down and talk about Sydney, so we haven't yet had a chance. This is actually the second time I'm recording this episode, as we had a little bit of a malfunction with the first footage. So apologies about the delay on this episode coming live. The game did kind of have a bit of a Brisbane feel for England when it came to the second innings, with an advantage that could have and should have been taken not being optimised. They kind of lost that moment in the game again, which is something that's been discussed quite a lot over the Ashes series. England getting in a position where they had the advantage, had the upper hand, and somehow Australia still managing to come back good. It's been known since Perth how much of a problem Travis Head can be at the top of the order and how important that wicket is quickly, especially on a pitch like Sydney. This was a much improved pitch from the Melbourne pitch we saw in the last test. A really nice balance between the bat and ball, I feel. It gave something to the batsmen if you could get in, it gave something to the bowlers. The pitch started to deteriorate as the game went on, give something to the spinners, as we saw spin become much more prolific in the last few days of the game. It was always known though that England weren't going to try for a draw, even when it did look like that should have been the task at hand. Australia managing to put on 567 in their first innings was just not something England wanted, nor maybe expected. I think the 384 from England in the first innings was probably 50, maybe 100 shy. I mean, hindsight being the thing it is now, it feels like much more than that. And I will say, watching the first part of that Australian first innings, it did feel like even 700, 800 possibly wouldn't have been enough, because the Australian batsmen just seemed to come to the crease and really take on that pitch well. Once again, England's issue was just not putting on enough runs with the bat. And this is where it started to feel a bit Brisbane, with the bowlers just not executing a consistent and relentless enough line and length that just made batting a bit too easy for Australia. Runs came a bit too freely. Brydon Cast was very guilty of bowling four in the same place, but those two that weren't quite there, a bit too short, a bit too wide, then obviously gave Australia back the advantage and got rid of any pressure that had been building in trying to catch the score. It was looking like an okay opening partnership for the first innings for England, but the top three scoring under 30 each just wasn't enough on a pitch that looked good. And when Stokes won the toss and elected to bat first, I've got to be honest, knowing the England team and how it works, how their mentality is, the style of play they have, I was surprised to see Stokes put them in to bat first. They're a much better chasing team, I think. If you look over their record, I think they have a higher win percentage when they are chasing rather than defending. So it was a bit of a surprise. It does make sense with the conditions. The overheads were looking more batting friendly. The wicket was obviously greener or fresher. And if you could get through that initial period of play, then there were runs in it, as was shown by Joe Root taking his second century down under 160. They're really bringing England into the game. Scoring just shy of half the runs with one batsman kind of shows the issues that England were having once again with their top order. And we'll come back to Jacob Bethell in a minute, because obviously he seems to have found his groove in the second innings of a test match. So if he can find that groove he gets in the second innings into the first, he can become a really powerful number three for England. Although the ship was rocky at the start, it was a great partnership between Root and Harry Brook that saw England kind of levelling off day one in a good position. The light issue was a confusing one at the end of day one, purely and simply because it seemed the umpires knew when they took the players off that they weren't coming back. Now there's the ruling about distance to lightning to the ground in Australia. If there's lightning a certain distance away, play has to stop. And that's a rule and regulation that's been in place for a while. So there's no issue with that. I think my issue being in the crowd, in the grandstand watching the test, was that none of this was communicated. There was never a moment where the umpires came out with the light reader. There was never a moment where it looked like they were even going to try and come back on. Even at one point, the ground staff brought the rain covers onto the wicket, which I thought was a bit over the top because it was slightly overcast, but there was no rain in the air. And then it rained. So clearly they knew something that they hadn't said to the people in the crowd. I don't know whether it was covered on comms, because I wasn't obviously listening to comms, but it did feel a little bit like the people that were in the crowd, in the grandstand that had paid the money to watch the test, there should have been a slightly better communication from the SCG to those people to let them know if they kind of knew that play was not going to return. And like I said, it wasn't even a case of, oh, we're going to wait it out and see. And there is an element to that. But when the umpires never came out with the light meter, they never came out to check the pitch, the wicket was never checked, it just seems now that they knew they weren't coming back out. And so that feels a little bit unfair as the patrons that were there, that information wasn't given to those people in the crowd earlier. Day 2 for me was moving day for this test, and purely because if Brook and Rook come out and carry on what they were doing, keep batting, maybe bat down to T, get lots more runs on the board, it felt like the game was really in England's pocket. But as we've seen one too many times this series, it was 10 minutes into the first session of play and Harry Brook was out. Brook kind of installs this questionable play style, and I think it's a little unfair. Let me explain why. It's almost given an unfair tarnish how he gets out. When he goes for a bombastic shot or toe ends something and it gets caught in the deep, people are very critical about how he's getting out, his play style. But they fail to see or maybe remember that the reason he's got so many runs so quickly is because of that play style. The play style he has is one that's there to kind of throw the bowlers off their length, get the field moving around, expand some more space because the captain of the opposition is trying to move the field a lot. And it is something that works very much in his favour. He averages over 50 with the bat. Maybe it's just the media that's doing this, but it does seem to be like, oh, he can play that way when he's scoring 80 off 40. But the minute it gets him out, that's now no longer okay. Think back to the India test at the Oval when he was going very, very strong with Joe Root. He just brought up his 100, playing in that way. And then he goes out to a ball that he missed times. And then everyone's very critical. And of course, that comes down to the whole discussion of how the result falls, right? If England win that test at the Oval, everybody talks about Mohammad Siraj dropping or standing on the boundary rope, catching Harry Brook and that going for 6 rather than out when it should have been caught. But because India win that test, we talk about how Harry Brook went out. And I just think you can't have it both ways. You either want the aggressive attacking player who, yes, sometimes will go for 5, but yes, sometimes will go for 155, or you want the conventional test player that goes out in more traditional ways. And I think there's starting to become a theme with the criticism around the England cricket team, which is how they're going out. And like I said, that's where this kind of unfairness to me comes in, because you either want them to play that style and accept that that might be how they go out to a high-risk shot, or you don't want them to play that style and therefore they'll go out in the more traditional ways. Just want to talk about Jamie Smith's dismissal, which has been cited as the worst shot of the series, the worst dismissal of the series. You can't get angry at an aggressive stroke player going out playing an aggressive high-risk shot when you're happy for them to play an aggressive high-risk shot and get runs. That is the way he played. We saw in Adelaide in the first innings him play his way back into this form and then very nearly get England across the line in Adelaide. And you'll have this argument that, oh, he did the same thing and went out to the same kind of shot in Adelaide. Yes, he did, but that's the way he plays. And I think the other thing is he is a number 7. So you kind of want him to come out and play this more aggressive attacking shot. We've seen him go on to do an 184 not out at Edgbaston last summer. So he can do it, and it's like Harry Brook, when it pays off, gee, does it pay off. It was a plan, it was a bouncer plan, it wasn't a well thought out shot, I'll give you that. I think he gets criticised more for it because Labuschagne threw the ball. I think if he goes out to a Nisa or a Boland or a Webster or a Green or a Stark, he gets less he gets less criticism for that shot, because it wasn't quite the same shot maybe, but it was similar in Adelaide. That's what he did. He was well set, he was getting runs, and he pitched it straight to. I just think it got a bit more of an aggressive criticism than I necessarily would have given it. And as I keep saying and will keep saying, you cannot be okay with these players playing high-risk shots and then get annoyed when these players play a high-risk shot and it gets an out. The other main difference here is that once you get through the kind of recognised batters 6-7 for England, the bottom order kind of have one way of playing. And we've seen Bryden Cast come out and play very well, which is why sometimes it's disappointing to see the tail-enders or the lower order just come out and try and hit the boundary very quickly, especially when you're facing bowlers that, if you respect the ball, get through the period, and okay, it was a new ball as well, so, all these things come into consideration, but I do think England's bottom order maybe could do with looking at someone like Australia and seeing how deep they can go. Look at Mitchell Starc throughout this series, to be fair. He's done so well with ball and bat, and that's been all about kind of just reading the situation, understanding where the game is, understanding what the team needs. Yes, sometimes the team needs you to come out and just try and score as many as possible. If it's likely you're going to go out anyway, then sure, throw the bat at it. But in the same breath, if you need to collate more runs on the board, and we've seen Bryden Cast do this, Gus Atkinson, who didn't play this test, but we have seen him guilty of doing this as well. Will Jacks has done it as well. We've seen them all do this, so we know it's possible. It just sometimes feels like the mindset needs adjusting, which kind of is the whole kind of takeaway for England from this series. It had looked like a really good 160 from Joe Root until Travis Head basically came out and said, hold my bat, and did the very, very same. I think this is where England really did kind of lose the test. It was, again, very Brisbane. It was that kind of opening hour or so, the first session where they had the ball in hand. The bowling just wasn't accurate enough. It was all over the place, and Travis Head was licking his lips at every ball that came down. He even came out in the post-day presser and said he'd happily have Matthew Potts bowl to him all the time because it was really easy to score, and that's a harsh and horrible thing to say. And I think on Matt Potts, this was his first test in the series. He was brought in to replace Gus Atkinson, who is very accurate, a good new ball bowler. I don't understand why Potts was given the new ball when you've got someone like Josh Tong, who is an opening bowler for Nottinghamshire in the county game. Why are you not using him? I don't understand why Bryden Cast was given the new ball so much. I know that this kind of comes back down to that loyalty and the loyalty that England want to play, and probably the way Stokes sees his position in the team, which is, I'm not a frontline bowler. I am first, second change. So I shouldn't be taking the new ball because I have bowlers who do that for me. And speaking on Stokes and speaking on doing things that other bowlers should be doing, I think this test really showed that, and this is where Stokes kind of flogged himself for 17 odd overs on a dead ball that wasn't doing anything. Most prolific swing bowler in the squad, and he pulls up injured on day 4 because he'd taken so much out of himself in day 3. Comes down to that, he didn't trust his other bowlers to be able to bowl accurately enough to restrict the running, so therefore he had to take the role on himself. And at this point in the series, with Atkinson gone, with Archer gone, with Wood gone, those other bowlers that maybe he'd have relied on in that moment, and it wasn't cracking, so it wasn't spinning at that moment in the game. It just came down to he felt that he had to do it himself. And, you know, he's 34. He's not as young and spry as he used to be. He can't just keep running in and then batting and then running in and then batting with no break. I don't know if it was recognisably okay, but just pushing himself beyond what he should be pushing himself beyond, right? Ben Stokes is so important to this team, and we'll talk about the management towards the end of the episode, and what I think England should do more, and we'll talk about that more in the next episode as well. It's not for Ben Stokes now to do the donkey work, to do the slog work, to do the hard work. Other players have to stand up, basically, and I think this was just another example where the bowlers didn't stand up. Of course, you can't pull Matt Potts out of the attack at that point because any confidence he did have is gone. You have to stick with him. You have to keep bowling him. And, you know, Will Jacks dropping an absolute dolly on the rope was quite painful to watch because that should have been taken, and that was Travis Head, which ends up being incredibly costly. And it was a long day in the field, especially on day 3, and it was hot. So day 3 was one of the hottest days they had, and England were basically out in the field for the entire thing. It was hard for everybody, but it wasn't then surprising to watch Stokes pull up on day 4 with an injury. Right abductor strain has been the word. I haven't seen any update on that thus far, but he did come out to field again in the second innings, and he did come out to bat, but he did not bowl. So clearly something done, but not too much. Just another word on Joe Root's fantastic 160. Another century down in Australia, now a century with the pink and red ball. So anybody who still thought that there was something to say that Joe Root is not one of the most prolific and best test batsmen in history, I think that conversation can now be put to bed. I do believe, if my numbers are correct, he is 57 runs off of 14,000 test runs. He is now under 2,000 runs off of Sachin Tendulkar, who's had 41 test hundreds now, which is equivalent to Ricky Ponting, and 10 behind Sachin Tendulkar, who has 51. Will he beat both those records? I highly believe so. And I very much look forward to seeing him do so. At the end of the first innings for both teams, Australia had a 183 lead. Considering they were put in to bowl first and England batted first, from an England perspective, that's certainly not what you're after. But it was one of those, when I was watching the first batting innings from Australia, 50-60 lead would have been contendable, I think. Once that got over 100, I know my belief kind of dipped, just because of how inconsistent the batting lineup's been, how difficult England found it to take 10 wickets in the first innings, had to do that again in the second to win the game. And they'd already put down 3, I think, or 4 at that point. The end number, I think, is 16 drop catches for England in this series. So hopefully the next signing we see for England is a fielding coach, because I do believe they need one when it's your fielding that's letting you down like that. And it's hard enough to take 20 wickets in a test match. Having to take 25, 26 is just, again, the whole game just felt very Brisbane, which is why it's kind of idyllic that I'm sat here in Brisbane doing this podcast. But yeah, Mitch Starc doing what Mitch Starc does and really proving why he was a very well-deserving player of the series. With another first over wicket, Zach Crawley falling LBW, this does raise the conversation of Snicko, which we'll get into a little bit more in a moment. But in terms of the Zach Crawley dismissal, I think it was close. I do think it went to umpires, cool. But when you don't play a shot, the umpire is way more likely to give an LBW out on the field. Again, it's Mitch Starc doing Mitch Starc things, bowling incredibly well, bowling fantastically. You can't deny that. And Crawley becoming the victim there, but it was obviously not what England needed. They needed a strong opening partnership. And we discussed this in the Melbourne podcast as well, that England rely so heavily on that opening partnership being strong, being long, putting runs on the board. When Zach Crawley and Ben Duckett get in, when they're playing, when they're hitting well, they score very quickly without really trying. It's a very effective opening partnership when successful. Duckett's been incredibly lean with the bat, no over 50 scores this series. Crawley's been inconsistent as usual. Some very good performances, some very poor performances, but more on the latter than the former, which has hurt England. It has meant players like Joe Root come out earlier, the ball's new, the ball's shiny, the bowlers are still very fresh, and that's why you then see him falling for such low totals as well. It's something England certainly need to address, whether it's Australia specific. It is hard to bat down here, harder than most places, especially if you don't know the conditions and you're facing Australia in Australian conditions. You're facing Mitch Starc with conditions he knows, loves and prefers. Scott Boland, who does not usually play for Australia in international tests outside of Australia. There's a reason for that, right? He's incredibly prolific, accurate and in a shoebox in Australia, but it's not necessarily something he can replicate on foreign conditions. So there are elements of it that you have to take into consideration, but it cannot be argued that Duckett has been lean with the bat this series and Crawley's been inconsistent more on the lower scoring side of things, which has exposed other players. However, Jacob Bethell coming in to prove what I've been calling for since before the India series made my absolute week, month and day. It was a fantastic sight to see. It was exactly what you wanted to see. A number 3, a Harry Brook, a Jamie Smith. That's the kind of batting you wanted to see. It's test cricket, right? It's not ODI, it's not T20. Now, I will agree, there are times in the game where that aggressive, striking cricket is required, needed, wanted, useful. Think of a Rishabh Pant. He does the same. He plays a very similar style of game of Harry Brook. You know every ball he's going to either block it or he's trying to hit it for 6. The thing is, you don't know which he's trying to do. I think maybe Brook has become a little bit more predictable as oppositions have got used to this style of play that England have. Bethell, it was such a mature innings. It was such a clever, calculated, low risk is the important thing. They were bouncing him. He was playing bouncers down, finding the gap, going for 4. When it got down to it, when it was him with the tail, his entire method of playing changed. It was no longer trying to hit the boundary. It was right, 4 or 5, and then we swapped the strike. He protected Matthew Potts so well. When the new ball came in at that moment, playing with the tail was so good. Had he have stayed at the crease longer, the longer he stayed at the crease, the more runs England were going to accrue. I think that was just the long and short of it. And could he have seen off that new ball a little bit longer and defended Josh Tong coming in to face the new ball with Mitch Starc, albeit now almost a day of bowling in, I think that would have really helped England. And, you know, he came out at the end of day 4 and said a 200 lead would be ideal. In the end, it was 160. Do I think 200 would have been enough? The wicket was breaking and giving more to the spin, as we saw Bo Webster come out and play some fantastic spin. Again, Ashes 3 for with spin. Mitchell Starc obviously getting a 3 for as well, but Mitchell Starc can just make any ball move, I think, at this point in time. Very, very, very good bowler. So the pitch was changing, it was deteriorating. I don't think it was as high scoring as it started. There wasn't enough for England to defend, so Australia didn't mind playing some risky shots. They didn't mind losing wickets kind of cheaply, because they also knew that England were chasing wickets and knew how quickly England needed to get those wickets. We are going to talk about Snicko now, especially on Jake Weatherald in the second innings, because that was out. I can't fathom still how it wasn't given out. Stokes came out after the game and said that after Adelaide, after the Carey incident, he'd gone to third umpire and the Snicko team and basically sat and been explained exactly how a third umpire's decision is made using Snicko. And he agreed that with the parameters in which they work with on a review, the Carey out could not have been overturned because there were too many frames between Snick and the visual contact. So he agreed that albeit the Carey incident was out, he understood why third umpire could not overturn that decision. However, this one, the Snick was miraculously actually in sync, but that is within the 1 to 2 frames visually outside that it had to be overturned. The bat is miles in the air, so this is not bat on ground. The ball is miles from Weatherall, so this is not coming off the pocket. This is not coming off. The only logical explanation as to what creates that Snick is the toe of the bat. It's a murmur, it's a feather, but it is a spike. There is sound here. How on earth that wasn't given out is insane. And I just think for the whole series, the problem is we're dedicating part of the podcast here to talk about Snicko, right? Which should not be happening. I cannot fathom how you can have the Big Bash League going on and they use Ultra Edge, a much more reliable and much more universally used edge technology. I can't fathom how the same grounds using Ultra Edge in Big Bash are not using Ultra Edge in an international test series, an ICC test series, an Ashes test series. It's inconsistent, it's unreliable. That wasn't given out because the third umpire could not absolutely say that the Snick came off the bat. And this is where inconsistency comes in, which is also very difficult to take, because Jamie Smith Perth was given out, in my opinion, on the same parameters as the Jake Weatherald one. Marnus Labuschagne, same test, Perth test, was not given out on the same parameters as Jake Weatherald one. Confusingly inconsistent, and the problem is it comes down to unreliable technology. If you could trust that the Snick that is actually miraculously in line with the toe of the bat is indeed the toe of the bat and not something from 2 or 3 frames earlier, you can trust that technology and you can use it. The third umpire rock and rolled that 5 or 6 times. The Barmy Army was going crazy, cheering every time the Snick came up, the feather came up, because it was out. So I still don't understand, and it's now like a week or so later. I haven't heard anything more about this, but I still don't understand how that wasn't given out. And it just returns to, bottom line, I think it was Mitch Starc who said it, and I couldn't agree more. ICC should have software that they use. They take that to every ICC test series that's part of the World Test Championship. That is the software that is used. Irrelevant of broadcasting rights, irrelevant of ground usage, irrelevant of cost. It should be an ICC regulated. They do it for the World Cups. The ICC take control of how every wicket is prepared for a World Cup because it's an ICC tournament. I don't understand how the World Test Championship is being treated differently. And if you want the World Test Championship to be respected by everybody playing in it, not just those at the top of the table, that needs to be consistent. Overrate penalties need to be consistent or just abolished. At the end of the day, I don't know what that brings. 4.5 days of very good cricket at the SCG. Both teams were behind on the overrates. I didn't feel penalised by that. These kind of things, if you want the World Test Championship to be taken seriously, I think they are the things that need to be considered. And we can't have a big international series like the Ashes being overcast and overshone by terrible and inconsistent technology that not even the umpires can trust. Sydney Test also marked the end of Usman Khawaja's international career. He will play domestically, but there will be no more international cricket. Final test to take at his home ground, and a win, and an Ashes win. So quite a nice way for him to bow out, albeit not really contributing that much with the bat in this test. In his career, he played 88 matches, 159 innings for 6,229 runs. Can't say it wasn't a prolific one. His highest score was 232 with 1,600s and 28 50s. Really great job from him. I hope to see him continue to do well in his domestic career or whatever else he may go on to do. Player of the match was Travis Head. Deservedly so, I think, in a winning campaign with his 163. Mitch Starc took player of the series, as I mentioned earlier, which absolutely makes sense. Highest wicket taker of the series. Definitely a game changer, and you can't deny in those first 3 tests, absolutely brought it with the bat as well. That is it from the Ashes series. As I said, we will have one more Ashes episode where we look over the whole series, look over both squads, look at who did well, who did not so well. We'll look over all of the squads, we'll look over all of the tests, and we'll do a little bit of a rundown, like a final review of the series, what both teams should do next. Though as we wrap up, I will say, in my humble opinion, I do not believe England should make any changes to their management team, bar adding a fielding coach, maybe a batting one too. I think it was Rob Key came out after Adelaide and did an interview where he explained that they were first kind of putting together this management team and they saw how many people were out on the field at the end of a game, 38 odd people. It just felt like a lot of people, a lot of voices, and I can understand that, but I do believe they've stripped back way too much. I think Paul Collingwood was fielding coach for England ahead of this series. You've obviously had Jimmy Anderson and Tim Southey kind of interimly come in as bowling coaches, but I think there needs to be now some solid specialist coaches in that setup. Some more voices for McCullum to kind of lean on, maybe take guidance from. I think the biggest takeaway for me is England just seemed very one-dimensional. And Ben Stokes kind of wrapped it up nicely as well after the Sydney Test, that when England started playing this style 3 years ago, it was new, it was bold, it was bombastic. Oppositions didn't really know how to handle it. They expected the prim and proper, block it out, go for the draw. You can't chase down 500 in the 4th innings. Wait, you just did. And it was exciting and explosive and kind of an assault to the senses. Just very like, how do you take this? Overwhelming. Whereas now they've been playing the same style for 3 years. Oppositions know what they're going to do. Predictability, one dimension. They didn't seem to have a lot of plans. Bryden Cast very quickly went back to short and wides, which Australia were like, well, gee, thanks. We'll just smack that to the boundary then. No consistency in the bowling, little consistency in the bowling. I think none is harsh to say, but little consistency in the bowling. England's bowling really peaked in Perth with that first innings where everyone was like, holy cow, this is something we didn't expect. We'll talk more about that next time, but they need some specialists. They need more game plans. They need more options. Stokes needs more people to stand up. Stokes needs more options to lean back on. And the other thing is, I'm not necessarily going to sit here and say Stokes was plan void, because I'm not necessarily sure that's fair. When you've got a bowling attack that can't do the plans you're setting fields to consistently, you have to adjust your plans to that. And if you go, okay, let's do a bouncer ploy, but they're throwing down half volleys, well, then you can't keep going back to that bouncer ploy with that bowler. So you've taken kind of a mode of attack out of disposal. Their inaccuracy at the stumps was removing LBW and bowled out of every innings. That's 2 out of 4 modes of dismissal gone before you've even started. So a bit one-dimensional, requires some more outward thinking, but the batsman requires some more match awareness, I think. This team is very good. I'll stand by that. I think these are the right people. Stokes, McCullum, Keys. I wouldn't want to see that change. England are very good at losing an away Ashes series, ripping up the toolbook and trying to start again. I think what's been done for the English cricket test team over the last 3 years has been incredibly good. If you look at their results from 3 years ago, from that 4-year period, and then to this 4-year period, yes, it's started to take a dive now, but still, they are more successful now than they were in the last 4-year cycle. So I wouldn't change anything. I think it's a domino effect, because I think if you change one, the others will leave, which is detrimental to the team. Give them 12 months. I think these cracks were exposed. I said this last time, I know, I'm repeating myself, but these cracks were exposed in the India series. They were wallpapered over by some very good batting displays and some very good bowling displays. But these problems were there. They've come to Australia and there's been nowhere to hide from these cracks. Australia's ripped down the wallpaper and there's cracks all over the wall. Now that has been identified, I genuinely think these are the right people to go, right, we can't do that again. Let's move forwards. Let's fix this. Let's be the best they can be, because it's an incredibly talented team. It's a little immature. It's a little match green. We'll talk about the preparation in the next one, but there's a lot of external things that came about that as to why England did the preparation they did. But we will discuss that in the next episode. My say is Stokes, McCullum, Hughes, leave them be, give them a year, get some specialists in, fielding specialists, batting specialists, bowling pace specialists, bowling spin specialist. Thank you so much for spending some time with me and listening today. Apologies once again for the delay to this. Hopefully I still covered everything I did in the first time I did it. I believe I did. But we will be back very, very soon for an Ashes roundup. And then we look forward to the Men's T20 World Cup, which comes up next month. We'll be covering that as well. There will be another Power Play podcast. We have some big news that has come out recently that I would like to cover, so that will be out shortly as well. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Do let me know your thoughts about Sydney down in the comments here on YouTube or on Spotify, wherever you're listening to this, wherever you're hearing your podcast. Do let me know down in the comments. We can carry on the conversation there. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for giving me your time. And I will speak with you about more cricket very, very soon.